Hello everybody, my name's Paddy Nixon. I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra in lockdown, and I'm here to talk this morning to Michelle Grattan about a week in politics. How are you this morning, Michelle?
Hi Paddy, I'm good. Also in lockdown, of course.
I'll start this week, Michelle, with the former Attorney General, Christian Portler. He was back in the news. It was revealed that he had a blind trust and therefore anonymous donors had covered some of his legal fees as part of the defamation case against the ABC, and he had no way of knowing who the donors were. The lack of transparency, as you know, has been widely criticised, and even former PM Malcolm Turnbull saying it was so wrong. So let's start by asking, are politicians allowed to accept anonymous donations?
Well, he would say, or he does say, that this was a private legal action and that he paid his own legal bills, so that these donations were to him personally, not political donations. And so he justifies this blind trust arrangement on those sorts of grounds. But even if it's within the rules, it's clearly not a good way to proceed in terms of principle. And I think in practical terms too, it's totally unwise, because names will come out later perhaps, or there are rumours that so-and-so donated and they may later get favours from the Liberal Party. All those sorts of things could be quite damaging for the Liberal Party and for Christian Porter himself. Now, in response to the outcry, the Prime Minister has asked his department for advice on whether this contravenes the ministerial code of standards, and that advice we haven't heard of as yet. We talk in the middle of Friday, so we should put a time on this, but in the next few days that advice will come and the Prime Minister will have to make a decision about what to do about Christian Porter. I would have thought the options are that he stands down from the front bench, he goes from the ministry, or he gets this money paid back via the blind trust as quickly as possible. He should in fact himself know that he should take action even without waiting for the Prime Minister.
Yes, it's that phrase I've heard a few times since I've come back to Australia. It doesn't pass the pub test, does it?
Absolutely, it doesn't pass the pub test. And for a cabinet minister not to realise that is really pretty extraordinary.
And then something else quite contentious this week. Scott Morrison, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson announced the new security partnership between the three countries. There's a whole range of things in there, including cyber infrastructure, etc. But the one that's generated the most debate is that Australia will acquire the capability to develop nuclear-powered submarines built in Adelaide. How important is this partnership, do you think, and what's driving it?
It's really important, I think, and a couple of things are driving it. Most obviously, the rising aggressiveness, assertiveness of China, which has Australia as well as the United States and certainly other countries in the region very concerned. And Australia wants to buy more insurance with the United States. It wants to make sure that its defence capabilities are very highly integrated with the American capabilities. Also, I think Scott Morrison wants to make an imprint on Australia's foreign and defence policy. He's reportedly been working on this arrangement for 18 months. The line that's coming from the government is that nothing was done during the Trump era because President Trump, who of course at the time was posing as a great friend of Australia and of Scott Morrison in particular, but President Trump was seen as too unreliable to have this deal concluded with. But now that the Biden administration is there, the time was right. I think from the American point of view, it's about making sure that you have this mutual compatibility and integration between Australian and American forces. From the British point of view, it's a post-Brexit thing where Britain wants to find ways to assert itself in the world, and that is very much driving it becoming more interested in the Indo-Pacific area. But it is interesting that this whole pact is the Anglosphere in our region reasserting itself.
And there's some knock-on implications for this. I actually heard the head of the European Union's trade relationships, I think it was, saying that this was a very worrying development, but particularly I think for France. Our submarine fleet was previously being built through a tender with French companies. How has the French government responded?
Well, the French government has been furious with Australia, but also with the United States. Australia just cancelled this deal, which was worth $90 billion, a lot of money, $90 billion. And we were several years into it, and it's just been totally wiped out. There's not even been any attempt to see if the French could be built into the new system, even though their nuclear-powered submarine, I think, is said to be one that would be quite appropriate for Australia. And to remember, the whole deal with France has involved taking the nuclear out of their submarine so that you got a conventional submarine that was what Australia wanted at the time. So we really have, at least for the immediate term, trashed our relationship with France, not least because the switch has been handled in a very undiplomatic way. The French president, of course, met Scott Morrison earlier in the year. It's not quite clear what was said at the time, but there doesn't seem to have been a direct indication that this was likely to happen. It's all been hushed up in incredible secrecy. So the French are feeling comprehensively dudded. And remember that France is a power in the Pacific region. It's, of course, got former colonies there, and it is important in itself in this region.
And of course, there's the inevitable commentary from China as well, which was not surprising in this context. I'm hopefully not worrying to the Prime Minister.
Well, China's reaction is certainly not surprising, because it's totally obvious that everything that's going on in this relationship is about China. I think from Australia's point of view, it's really got two competing considerations to take into account here. On the one hand, there's no doubt that the China threat is mounting, and Australia has to increase its preparedness to deal with that threat. But on the other hand, if you make your stance too anti-China, too assertive in itself against China, you are in fact likely to increase the threat. You're poking the panda very hard. And it's a question of trying to make sure that you don't increase your risk in the process of preparing to deal with the China risk. Some would say, I think, that Australia is not getting that balance right. There's another point too in the submarine deal specifically, and that is that these subs won't be ready for up to a couple of decades. Now, on the indications that we have, it's quite possible that the tension between the United States and China, if it's going to come to a head, will come to a head in the medium term or even a shorter time frame over Taiwan, for instance, and that will be long before we have the subs capability.
And then sort of following on from that announcement between the relationship between those three countries, Scott Morrison's going to be meeting Joe Biden in Washington next week. What's going to be on that agenda?
Obviously, the reinforcement of the security messages. It's a meeting of the Quad leaders, and the Quad also includes India and Japan. So they will be discussing the regional outlook, but the interest particularly, I think, will be on the climate talks. Climate will be featured in the Quad discussion, but also, and particularly important, in the bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister and the President. Now, we know that Australia is under a lot of pressure from the United States to embrace that 2050 net zero target, and also to improve its medium-term ambition on climate ahead of the Glasgow conference in November. We don't expect the Australian position to shift while the Prime Minister is in the United States. There's still a deal to be done with the Nationals to get such a shift, but nevertheless, I think the exchange on climate will be significant and particularly interesting, and will be read for the signals it sends for what might come later.
Michelle, that's been fascinating as always, and I look forward to chatting to you again. I hope you're going to enjoy a little bit of the sun this weekend here in Canberra. Not warm, but at least it'll be bright and not raining.
Thanks a lot, Paddy.
Take care.